With hearts the size of cars. There are animals with hearts the size of fists.
My name is Madruz. Our guest speaker for today is David Navarrete. He's the Director of Research Initiatives and Accredited Education at Sky Factory. He has an MBA in Human Resource Management from MIU and an MSc in Public Relations from Boston University. David researches, drafts continuing education courses for architects, designers, facility managers, all of which are accredited by the American Institute of Architects and the Green Building Certification Institute, among many others. He has co-authored in-depth articles on cognitive biophilia for diverse architectural designs and healthcare publications. David is a member of Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture's Center for Education and the Center for Health Design. Our first panelist today is Cliff Rose. He's the director of the Concept to Market Institute at College of Business Department at MIU. He has a Bachelor's of Art in Physiology with a minor in sociology from Southwest Missouri University. He has 30 plus years of experience as an executive of marketing and brand development. He has been an executive producer, writer, and developer of over 200 TV commercials, thousands of national radio commercials, over 50 websites, national newspaper advertising, and social media marketing. His clients include ConAgra, Disney World, Century 21, Ralston Purina, and Air France, among many others. Our second panelist for today is Thomas Bryan. He's the store manager at the Fairfield Hy-Vee store. He has been in the retail business for over 20 years and at Hy-Vee for over 15 years. He has worked at 5 locations with Hy-Vee, helping manage operations and inventory at each store. Now I will give the floor to our guest, David Navarrete.
All right, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone, or good afternoon if you're in a different time zone. It's a pleasure to be here today and share a little bit of our journey at Sky Factory. So first, let me start by sharing my screen. And can everybody see this photograph of our current factories, a 12,000 square foot factory here in town? And you can see our Skymobile in the background, and we have an organic farm and our solar array in the back. And let me see. And today's talk is about how corporate culture can thrive even in the most difficult of circumstances. And for a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses like the Sky Factory, we've never really faced a situation like the COVID-19 pandemic. So I will talk a little bit about how that has impacted us. But first, I will want to talk about what Sky Factory is and why it's so different from other companies. And there's a question at the bottom of the screen that says, what's in your DNA? Now, most companies have hierarchy as their model, top-down decision-making to the bottom. The founder of Sky Factory, Bill Witherspoon, who's an artist by trade and also a serial entrepreneur, when he founded Sky Factory, he was 60 years old. And by that time, he was very familiar with starting a business, having to raise money or convince investors to invest, and making the business successful. But he is really an artist by trade, and this is kind of the environment that he loves, being out in the southeastern Oregon desert and being exposed to the beauty of the completely wide open sky, which actually has a very profound effect on your physiology. And he got very curious when he got the idea of whether you could have this experience of vastness, an infinite zenith above your head, which is that sense of relief you feel when you've been working hard in the building, and then you walk outside and you feel suddenly a real visceral sense of decompression. Well, that's your inside our brain, the cerebellum, and there's other areas of the brain that keep track of how much space there is around your body. And this is very important because architects and designers know that when they design an interior, you have to have the proper spatial relationships, because the body has this instinctual sense of feeling that there's enough space around you. And that's also why people gravitate to offices with windows. But anyway, the infinite sense of relief over your head is due to the sky's canopy. So Bill wanted to see whether that experience could be replicated indoors. And at the time that he had this idea back in the late 90s, digital technology had not advanced to the point where you could do that. However, at the time, hospitals and clinical environments already knew from research that having imagery of nature is actually very restorative for people's sociologies, particularly when you go to the hospital and you're under stress. Having nature images is much more therapeutic than having, for example, abstract art or things that don't have an easy or digestible meaning. So when he founded the Sky Factory, he wanted to really do a business, and here over our building, we have our mission statement. You know, the purpose of this business is to enrich and sustain life. And as I mentioned in the first slide, you know, what's in your DNA? Bill kind of wanted to build Sky Factory following the blueprint of a living organism, as opposed to a hierarchy, which is, once again, everything is concentrated at the top and information flows down as in a pyramid. He wanted to have, if we study, you know, any living, organism, the blueprint of intelligence is found in every cell. So he really wanted to have a place where you could empower every single staff member to have information about the business, regardless of whether they work in the marketing or, you know, operations or accounting department, and be able to see the big picture. And that would allow people to really, really explore their potential and challenge themselves as entrepreneurs do. He really wanted to see whether he could encourage people to be entrepreneurial, even in the context of a small company. Now I will explain a little bit of what we do before we go into how COVID impacted us. What we do is we create these photographs, what we call open sky compositions, and we basically compose them, the cloud and foliage layers, in a way, and the way they're placed in these quadrants is not random. We're actually trying to move the eye in a way that it creates an illusion of space. And some of our research has actually confirmed that when people see this, they're not seeing a symbolic image of the sky. They're actually feeling that they're closer to an open exterior. And that's really what makes Sky Factory's photography and what we call our biophilic illusions of nature so powerful. Because there's many companies that do these images, and there's plenty of companies that sell them a lot cheaper, but they do not have the depth of impact that our images have, because they're bisensory. They're not only visual, but they're spatial. And that's taking advantage of what I mentioned in the beginning, that there's a restorative barometer of what's called spatial cognition, that sense of how much space there is around your body. And that's why people gravitate to the outdoors when you take a vacation. And when you come back to work, you're actually a lot more effective. So having that relationship near your body in an enclosed space is very therapeutic. For example, here is a basement clinic in Paris, France, where people were getting very agitated if they had to wait for a long period for their doctor. And once we introduced this set of skylights, people would actually sit in that interior much longer and wait for their time. Now, why do I mention these things? Because as you can see, our product is visual, it's visceral, and it's something that you have to experience directly. Therefore, a lot of our basically sales or marketing involves meeting people face to face. And that was the biggest impact of the pandemic on us, because it took away our main tools for meeting basically professionals and letting them know about the impact of our products and installations. We usually go to some of the biggest trade shows in the healthcare industry. For example, this is a picture of RSNA, the Radiological Society of North America. It's basically the largest show for diagnostic radiology. It takes place in Chicago. And you have the biggest names in the industry, reserving space. Reserving space in these vast interiors costs hundreds of thousands of dollars per square foot. In total, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then bringing all this machinery, they bring actual machines into the space, costs, a company like Siemens might, drop $500,000 just for a display that's there just for 5 days. So Sky Factory also goes to these shows, and we put on a display of what the effect of our skylights and digital cinema windows. And that was something that got completely stopped in 2020. All of these shows were canceled. The second thing that we do was that, well, if you don't go to a trade show to see our products, we come to you. Why? Because we're in a very small town here in southeastern Iowa. So we drive out, we schedule out appointments with our architectural firms, from coast to coast. We even go to Canada, and we show architects. We greet them, or we even go to hospitals and any kind of environment that thinks that they could benefit from having a perceived window or skylight to the outdoors. We show them what that could look like. And as you can imagine, you're in a very small trailer here, and we can pack in, 10, 15, I think the record is 29 people in here, and do an hour-long presentation. And nobody feels claustrophobic because you have these perceived installations that make you feel like you're closer to the outside. So people get it. You don't have to convince them, because once again, this is an autonomic physiological response. When your body knows that it's not real in terms of your intellectual capacities, but your body feels that memory because your brain is being activated in a different way, they understand the power of the product. Now, the third thing that we do is we also give on-site presentations of the architectural courses that we research and prepare. And we do this all year long. We have our courses are approved by a number of professional organizations, not only for architects and designers, but for property managers and facility managers, and also people in the healthcare industry. Well, that also went away. You can imagine that everybody canceled their appointments at the beginning of the pandemic without vaccinations, or people didn't know the risks. We were getting canceled outright. So here's a quick map of where we were at that very interesting point in 2020, just when that curve just went off the top. Suddenly the company, all 30 of us here in our headquarters had to get together and see, what are we going to do? Clients were basically canceling or freezing their orders. No hospital wanted to receive our product, even if they had already paid for it, because they were going into emergency mode. Everybody was, some of these projects take a long time to basically mature, but nobody really knew the consequences of the pandemic. So we immediately had to do something that we've never done before, because our company really doesn't, all of these products are basically made to ship. They're not stored, and we have a just-in-time inventory system in our factory. We have a very little inventory. We're very efficient that way. Well, the pandemic kind of changed that, because suddenly we had to keep all the orders that were supposed to go out. Another big thing that happened is, as a small business, suddenly when your cash flow and your, all your revenue flows and costs get altered in such a dramatic way, we were very fortunate to take advantage of one of the programs that was available here in the US, which was the payroll protection program. A lot of businesses just basically let go of their employees. But for a small business with the kind of culture that we have here, we wanted to preserve everyone's job as much as possible. And this loan program from the government allowed us to maintain most of our payroll intact, even though most people ended up going home to work. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we did have to cut back on people's hours, and we just worked pro bono on future projects. Now, the other aspect that I want to bring up about the pandemic is, as a corporate actor, you don't only have a duty to your clients or your vendors or your suppliers, you also have a duty to your community. And particularly for Sky Factory, working in the healthcare industry, suddenly the people that we basically design products for were facing a very difficult circumstance where they didn't have the proper equipment. If you remember early in the pandemic in the US, there was a shortage of the personal protection equipment. So we learned very quickly that this doctor in Taiwan, Dr. Xianyong Lei, knowing that many healthcare practitioners who were dealing with the first, the most acute cases in healthcare could not protect themselves, he came up with this quick invention, which he called an aerosol box. If you couldn't basically have a mask that was sufficiently robust, like the N95, to keep away the particles from the COVID virus, and you didn't have the body equipment, maybe you could isolate the patient in this kind of acrylic box. So he was very humane in the sense that he quickly came up with this design, quickly put it up in the Creative Commons so that people could actually download this thing. And a lot of people in the industry or manufacturers were basically taking advantage of this. And that's what we did for our community. We immediately had our engineers and craftspeople take the model, and we immediately went first to our local hospital, who immediately made some of the nursing staff and doctors available. We looked at the initial model, and one of the things that happened is, as you can imagine, in Taiwan and even China, now people their biology is a little bit different. We're a lot bigger here in the West than we are in the East. So the box didn't actually quite work in the dimensions that he provided. So we had to go back to the shop, took measurements, immediately went back to the hospital, changed the radius of the hands so that the nurse could inspect the patient, or put both hands into this single hole and hold some of the devices that they use to basically assess the acute stage of the virus. And we immediately got to work. We had a donation for the materials. And since we had the time early in the pandemic, we immediately went to help out our local hospital. And then through the network of hospitals in Iowa and the Midwest, we started receiving more and more requests for these boxes for all the hospitals that didn't have basically the proper equipment. So very quickly, we had all of these aerosol boxes, and we delivered them right away. And here's a map of all the hospitals that requested those, as far as Minnesota and neighboring Nebraska. And then we discussed that experience with we're a member of the Iowa Sustainable Business Forum. But now going back to the business side of things, as you can imagine, I mentioned that trade shows is one of our biggest draws. As you can see, here's a pre-pandemic trade show draw. The following year, that year, they were canceled. And then last year in 2021, you could hear crickets in a lot of these shows because people were not feeling totally safe about going. And so that kind of went down quite a bit, and now it's just recuperating at this point. And same thing, on-site presentations had to give way to virtual classrooms. Architects and designers were still looking for some credit on that. And then in terms of I'll very briefly talk about the 5 pillars of our culture, which is transparency, flat management, consensus, service, and performance. In terms of transparency, unlike most businesses where you're only given the information that you need for your particular department, here we have a weekly metrics meeting in which we share all the financials of that week of every department, and each department makes a presentation, and anybody can ask any questions about what's going on. So we give total information to the people on staff to see where the business is and where it's going. We also have, as I mentioned, flat management. We don't have layers of decision makers. We try to keep things as flat. And that was a very interesting experiment that was featured in Inc. magazine back in 2008. They interviewed Bill and asked him how he enjoyed doing this. It's a very risky model. You have to invest a lot of time. Sometimes it doesn't work for a lot of people. Uncertainty is sometimes something that people do not like. They want to be told what they need to do and how they're going to be evaluated. So sometimes you have to find the right match of people to bring into your team. And only those people that thrive in that sense of taking risks, not being afraid of failure or criticism, constructive criticism, can thrive in this environment. And the same magazine came back in 2015, and they asked us, how's the model going? And the model, is very plastic. It's not static. It changes because it changes depending on who's in the model. And by then, we did have to give a little more authority to the president and CEO of the company to be able to stir the company in situations where fast decisions needed to be made. And the pandemic obviously was one of that, even though that the system was installed back in 2015. So as our community of staff members changes, we are able to adapt and continue to thrive. The other aspect of our model we said is consensus. In our weekly meetings, we try to get buy-in from everyone, or everyone can discuss if they have objections to some of the decisions that are being made. And the reason why people care about this is because your bonus depends on it. Here, it's not, you don't get paid because, I'm an engineer, I get paid twice as much as somebody who's working on the factory floor. We also have a very flat salary, all of us, and we all share in the collective profit of the company. So that's why what you do in your particular job at Sky Factory does impact the bottom line in a very real way. So believe me, people are paying attention to those numbers every week because they want to get a good paycheck. And as a small business, we've gone through the business cycle of being really lean years and then very profitable years. So during the lean years, it's very difficult for everyone because, like I say, those salaries are very basic. So that's what makes people want to really make sure that the decisions we make are being a benefit for all of us. The other fourth element of our company culture is providing superior service, not only to our vendors and clients, but to the community, which we did in the pandemic, when we had to basically keep all the orders for quite a while for our clients, and then having to really pedal when everybody wanted to order last year, and suddenly we had a supply chain issues, which we still continue to experience. So that's been a very kind of dramatic switch in our ability to fulfill orders. And then the last thing is about performance. Once again, here you have to be self-motivated to excel. You're not going to have a supervisor coming over you and trying to, encourage you. We all try to be very collegial, and we're all actually very open, and we try to trust each other during periods of stress. And the pandemic has changed some of our operations. For example, we used to have an organic garden at the beginning of the pandemic, but now that we're no longer in that building and that employees were not at the office, that was no longer running. And we try to continue to support the local economy with local suppliers. Now, I know that I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to wrap up just with a few of the trends that we see with the pandemic. And even though I have more slides about some of the successes that we had, because 2020 was a very unusual year and we actually had lots of pleasant surprises, I will keep those in case that we have time in the rest of this morning. But I just wanted to mention is well, we know that the future of work is in flux. And this obviously impacts how designers and architects will design the future workplace. Remote work is here to stay. Some people feel that it's actually increases productivity. Other people feel that in-person interaction is a lot more, it really helps with morale and motivation. So that's something that's had to be watched going forward. As you can see here, before the pandemic, only 4% of high-paying jobs were remote, and now it's 15%. So it's basically tripled, and that will continue to be as more people are, as we have very tight labor markets in many countries, including the US. So, and particularly, for example, Sky Factory, we need skilled labor. We could ask someone from a big city to move here or see whether we're willing to work remote with them. Usually Sky Factory likes to have people come here because that's the only way in which you can really experience the culture. And one last thing that I mentioned is from McKinsey & Company, which is a world-class consulting and management consulting company. They're talking about what things will the future of the workplace need to do. And one of them is that you need to basically roll with the changes that are coming, but at the same time, you have to keep people connected in a meaningful way. So they say you have to embrace this hybrid model of being in person at the office and allowing people to work remotely. You have to reimagine their physical space. If you're going to ask people to come to the office, like, a lot of industries do not want people remotely. They were asking them to come there. Well, then you have to make that environment very attractive. So that has also meant how you're going to make people feel comfortable in the workplace. And third, you have to manage fundamental human needs in terms of being able to disconnect from what's become a 24/7 connected world, which if you look at the neuroscience behind that, that is not so good. In order to be at your peak potential, you have to be able to unplug. And you're seeing more, particularly with younger people, that inability to self-regulate that digital interaction. And many people, even in the architectural design industry, believe that technology is going to be the way forward, where there's other groups that feel that we need to go back to this nature connection, which we get through design and art. This is a field called neuroaesthetics that studies how the brain perceives visual and artistic stimuli. So the next section was more about what happened to us in 2020 in terms of our success, because we didn't expect that in the middle of the pandemic, we would have literally our best year ever in terms of success. One of the things that we do is that we enter architectural contests, and Architizer is one of the biggest, is one of the most prestigious architectural programs, not only for projects, but for products. And the reason is because they have literally a marquee jury judging these products. For example, here on the second bottom line, you see Neri Oxman, who's a professor at MIT. She's a very bright professor. She's featured in a Netflix series called Abstract. There's an entire episode on what she does. And she was on the jury of Architizer. So you have world-class architects judging the projects and the products. And that year, we just happened to enter two products, the Aperture Sky Ceiling and the Infinity for open ceilings. And the fun part about this contest is that not only do you have a jury aspect, you also have a popular vote. So anybody can actually come here and vote. These are just screenshots of those 7 days in which we were trying to, mobilize our social media and all our friends to vote for us. And we managed to win both categories. So this was our third and fourth Architizer Award. And it just keeps us at the forefront of design in this field. And we were very lucky in that sense. And also the Architects newspaper gave us another award for the Aperture Sky Ceiling, which this one's featured in a project that I will mention in a couple of slides. Oh, it's the next one. I left a model of the Aperture at the Foster & Partners London office before the pandemic in 2019. And they happen to be involved in a project, in a competition with Branch Technology, which is a 3D printing company. And they're part of a team that's competing in a NASA challenge about 3D printing extraterrestrial human habitats. And they loved the Aperture so much in terms of the ability to connect a very small environment to something that was meaningful and restorative, that they wanted to add it to a demo structure that they just presented to NASA literally 2 weeks ago. So over the summer, we held meetings with them. These are 3D printed lunar modules for a much larger project. And they wanted to see whether we could put in our skylights in there. So this is the actual facility in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where Branch Technology is located. And we took the Aperture and we basically converted it to a hexagonal perimeter, and we added a new product that's coming that's got basically circadian and ultradian modulations. Circadian modulations help change the color temperature of the images, so it helps to enhance circadian modulation, because as you can imagine, on the moon or Mars or wherever they go, there's going to be no sun to dictate how your body should basically self-regulate. And the ultradian modulations is something that's actually a patent pending algorithm that Sky Factory has created that helps to change the intensity of the light. One of the things that makes attention dull indoors is static lighting. So these skylights modulate very softly the intensity of light, which mimics the movement of clouds. So these two attributes were part of those two modules that were presented to NASA just a couple of weeks ago, and they're based once again on the science, 2020 was also a great year for our research. We presented at the European Healthcare Design Conference this whole notion of that you can produce our genuine perceived connection to the outside through these illusions that are bisensory. So we presented our poster in our scientific abstract at this conference, and also at the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. We had another presentation there. These were done virtually because in 2020, nobody wanted to actually do an in-person conference. So we discussed how our fMRI brain scanning of people looking at our photography through the installations actually engages spatial maps in the parahippocampal place area. It's a very specific area of the brain. And that's the reason why basically all top 10 hospitals, as ranked by US News and World Report, use our products. And that knowledge is basically spread to other industries. So now corporate spaces that don't have that access to the outside can have a meaningful connection. And for example, in New York City, in which there's a lot of lack of housing, in New York, you cannot make a basement apartment available for rent if it doesn't have a window. And that's, once again, to make sure that there's occupant wellness. But if you put in a virtual skylight that has an evidence-based design benefit in terms of providing that restorative feature, then it's possible. So we're included in that, in their basically catalog of solutions for that. And my last slide is just not a lunar module on the surface of Mars, but this is actually Bill Witherspoon's 90 square foot trailer out there in southeastern Oregon, where he currently finds himself. And that's just a fitting conclusion to one man's, journey from an idea in the place that he loves the most to creating this business that has really thrived. And even though the pandemic changed a lot of the things that we do, we're still going strong. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, David, for providing us with such in-depth information about Sky Factory and the amazing initiatives and processes pre and post-COVID. Now we'll give the floor to Cliff Rose to proceed with the webinar.
So my focus is on the impact on organizational change that COVID has had. I've been involved in many companies' products and development of products all over the globe for 30 years. The only place I haven't developed an ad campaign is in Russia. Every other place we have, on television, radio, print, many websites, in developing brand awareness to increase sales. Now I'm developing a product that I invented about 5 years ago called the ThermoJoe. You can check it out at thermojoe.com. If you drink coffee or tea, you know it gets cold fast. This prevents coffee and tea from ever getting cold. You select your favorite temperature and it'll maintain that all day without wires or charging plates. You could be camping or biking or hiking or skydiving, and it'll maintain your temperature. It's a great product, and we sell it all over the world, like I mentioned, but there was a very direct impact when COVID launched. All of our products are made in China, about 6 different cities in China, the main one being Shenzhen, China. And right when we were getting ready to launch our campaign and had ordered about 12,000 pieces, COVID hit Shenzhen, China, a city of 20 million people that were put on immediate lockdown. Now, what does immediate lockdown mean in your city? You could not go out of your apartment. And if you did, there were armed guards who would arrest you immediately if you were out on the street. That's the impact that COVID has had recently. And unfortunately for the world, it was just implemented again. COVID is not over. And so the importance of what I feel in this conversation is, how do you, as a student listening to this conversation, prepare yourself for the future to have a great job when something like COVID impacts the world? Well, the supply chain goes very, very deep. Maybe some of you have thought about, what is the supply chain? He didn't address how many companies all over the world are involved in creating each small aspect of their product. And what most people think about is one tier. There are 4 or 5 tiers of products that affect the sale of a product. And what most companies don't know is how we're going to be impacted when the 4th tier of products, the city gets shut down or they run out of raw materials to make our product. A good example is everybody knows the world ran out of computer chips. Well, what did that one small thing, how did that one small thing impact the world? You couldn't buy a new car because all new cars have computer chips in them. Well, all of a sudden, the pandemic shut down the production of computer chips that go in every single new car sold on this planet. So you couldn't buy a new car. What was the impact? Think of all the salespeople and all the mechanics and all the people who were involved in selling a new car all over the world. They lost their jobs. Many companies, like restaurants, couldn't get food, or the price of their food escalated dramatically because the supply chain was impacted, and so the prices escalated. We're experiencing that right now. What I've read is about 500 businesses a day are closing in the world because they can't operate, they can't be competitive because of inflation. Inflation is a direct result of COVID. COVID shutting down the supply chain in many, many areas. What does that supply chain look like, say, to a restaurant? Where do they get their milk? Where do they get their meat? Where do they get their lettuce? And on and on and on and on. And so the supply chain has been seriously, dramatically impacted. When we bought about $500,000 worth of Thermo-Joes, the price had escalated about 30%. And so we had to increase our price. But the biggest problem was that the town of Shenzhen, 20 million people, was shut down. Totally shut down. You could not get anything out of Shenzhen. And that shutdown lasted about 7 months. So we had been launching a national advertising campaign on television and radio and newspaper and all of the social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Google, and we couldn't get product. And so what do? Who makes those decisions? So in addressing the specific question that Ayako posed us, what is the impact on organizational change? Who makes those decisions to go forward? Do we spend the money on advertising? Do you continue to advertise product? When you made a commitment to a company like, well, Shields or Dick's Sporting Good or Sears to put a product in, and you find out you're involved in a 7-month delay, those decisions have to be made. Most organizations weren't prepared for this. They weren't prepared because they didn't have a team of specialists who were trained and specialized in what happens when you run into a pandemic. How do you prepare for that? And a very important question is, when is the next pandemic going to hit? We don't know, but I'll guarantee you something else down the road is going to happen, whether it's a pandemic, who could be a new flu, it could be a war. If we're very honest about what the future holds, we have to look at how do we prepare ourselves. So what does it make me think, since I'm a professor at MIU? what if we put our attention at MIU to start a program that is training, specifically designed to train people to prepare themselves for the next big hit, because it's going to happen. We're foolish to think as a global society and a global supply chain that there's not going to be another one. So how do we prepare? How does MIU prepare you specifically to get a job to focus on answering all the problems? I came up with a title for a course. How do we create an MA in risk mitigation and preparedness in the supply chain management? Something like that. Because what I'm thinking of, how do those students listening to this presentation prepare themselves to get a job when this is such a global problem? I want to see all of you be prepared and have a job. So I'm willing to make a commitment to work with Dennis Heaton and John Hagelin and the rest of the management at MIU. How do we structure a program that can prepare all of you for what the world is experiencing right now? There are many, many aspects that I can talk about. One, the last one, since I'm out of town, and I have a question for David, and that question is, how do we work together, since you're a Fairfield company, and we're going to hear from Thomas in a minute, how do we work together to prepare a new program at MIU for a whole new generation of students who are prepared to specifically address the unforeseen and almost guaranteed next pandemic or risk that's going to be coming to the world, so that our supply chain is running like a well-oiled machine? And how do we handle those? How do we get jobs with all the companies? Wow, I'm an expert. I went to MIU and I have a degree on MA in risk management and preparedness for supply chain disruption. So I'm wanting to see how we can create that. We handled it. We were very lucky that we were continue at Thermojo. It's actually Master House Products. We prepared by ordering extra product, not in anticipation of a problem, but we had ordered a couple of extra containers that helped us get through the supply chain disruption. And it's been a major thing on a global scale, but I think we can prepare ourselves for the next big hit. It may be another virus, it could be a war, it could be just we run out of some natural resources. We don't know, but I want to be optimistic that all of you are the future to answer all of these problems. And so I think all of us can be part of the solution. I'm glad to answer any questions about that going forward. But I think that looking at the level of risks for all problems going forward fall into 4 or 5 categories. Questions like, what are the questions that we're blind to? What are the questions that we don't have the answers to when it comes to a pandemic or a supply chain disruption? Who needs to make those answers? What are the answers to the questions we don't even know to ask yet? And who are the people that we hire to answer those questions to make sure that our businesses and our products are viable in the future?
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you so much. Good luck with your plan. And now I will give the floor to Thomas Bryan.
Thanks for having me today. As far as COVID and the impact of business, we here at Ivy with dealing with grocery retail have a definitely unique aspect on this, because while everybody needs groceries, we definitely have been challenged in several different facets. One thing obviously that's affected everybody is supply chain, and that's no exception to us. One problem that we continue to have today is writing ads that we have to put out 4 to 6 weeks in advance. And at the time, knowing that you're going to get the product, but then when you get to that point, not being able to get it, transportation issues, trucking, truck driver shortages and stuff like that ends up playing a huge impact on what we can do for the store, for our community, and getting those groceries to folks. It's definitely taxed a lot of redundancies that we had with our supply chain prior to COVID. We had, where we had warehouse with stuff stocked ahead of time, some of that supply has dwindled. And so, it's not something that just instantaneously fixes itself overnight. And so it's been a challenge there. Staffing is one that I know our industry has really felt a huge issue with a lot of early retirements. One comment that was made to me by one of my coworkers that had been doing this for 40 something years was, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And this is something that I wasn't even ever anticipated happening in my career. And so a lot of these folks retired earlier. And so then, it left a big shortage with not only experience, but also just able bodies to keep up with the huge amount of demand that came from COVID. Sales obviously are one that has been affected, and just people's shopping habits. One thing that we've noticed immediately right at COVID was online shopping. It just blew up to an extraordinary amount of folks using it versus what we used to do before. And so where we were doing, maybe a dozen orders a day, we had days where we were doing 150 orders. And so that's definitely something that we've had to adjust. And especially with the online aspect, having an IT person, working on the website, tweaking things and working on the logistics of that so people can still shop for their groceries just as well as being in the store. And so it's definitely lost an aspect when it initially happened, because people had to adapt to, I don't just get a walk around the store and compare products. I have to look at a page online and decide, what do I want? And for us, it changed a lot of aspects. And, you had to make sure that your product was on the online site to make sure that people had that accessibility to it, because it wasn't just putting up a display so people are reminded, with Thanksgiving being at the forefront of our mind here, that they need, turkeys for Thanksgiving or whatever it may be. And so that's definitely been a challenge that we've had to grow accustomed to, especially with more online shopping habits influencing things. Another thing that we're kind of seeing now with some more impacts with COVID is just people's buying habits. People don't buy like they used to before COVID. One of the things that me and a lot of my colleagues noticed was we used to have a salad bar almost in a lot of our stores, and no one really wanted to reach into a buffet with COVID going around, because you never know who the other people that were reaching into it, whether they were sick and stuff like that. So that's a model that we had to get away from. But, to this day, we're still trying to innovate ways that we can still incorporate some of that stuff back in without having that challenge. Like Cliff said, thinking ahead to what's the next big thing that could impact us, or is there another pandemic that could, happen? Who knows when? As I always tell people, none of us know the future. None of us have a crystal ball to see ahead, but we can definitely plan for stuff like this. And it's definitely been one of those things that we've had to keep at the forefront of our mind whenever we do a lot of anticipation and planning on different aspects and trying to retool a lot of our stuff. And then as far as the operations side of things go, it's been a trial and tribulation for us, because while everybody sees the forefront of groceries being the business we have, we still have equipment that has to help us do that job. I think of our refrigeration cases and some of the issues we've encountered with acquiring parts. And you can't have a refrigeration system down in a grocery store for multiple days because you have to hold that product and you have to hold it at temp. And so it's a huge amount of ingenuity sometimes on trying to make sure that your equipment is running and isn't having issues. One thing that, we were having issues was getting fans that blew the cold air into some of these cases. And it would take, I think we had one point where it took 8 to 12 weeks to get these fans ordered. And so when one broke and there was none on hand, you had to figure out ways to kind of combat that. And we've definitely, it's definitely influenced a lot of how we do things on that end with, instead of just carrying a couple extra parts for some of these common problems, we're carrying, stuff for entire cases go down. And so the other aspect of the operation side is, whereas we don't go out in front of, we don't have to go to our clients come to us, is, we have had to definitely do a lot with Zoom with a lot of potential buyers and stuff. So instead of having vendors come out and present their items, we've been having to adjust to the virtual world, just like everybody else on that aspect of it. And so it definitely created a bit of a issue on that side of things because you didn't see as many new items come out in the first couple years. And so it's definitely affected things on that side. The biggest thing I would say out of all this is just the flexibility and just the agility that we've had to adapt to in a lot of our different aspects, because it's one of those things where, you have to be flexible. You have to be able to adjust on the fly. And, because you don't know what's going to come next, especially with some of the repercussions of COVID that, we haven't even thought of yet. So it's definitely something that we've definitely here at Hy-Vee have had a lot of consideration and something to look forward to. So, but again, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Thomas, for joining today's webinar and sharing all of that you shared with us. Now we have some questions from the chat for Mr. David. First, we have Kishore thanking him for sharing all of his knowledge with us. And he says, awesome idea to business and benefit to people. Now we have a question from the audience from Mohan Raj. He says, thank you for your explanation of your mission and culture. And his question is, did you start on more job crafting during the pandemic? And what he means by that is job crafting as opposed to job.
Yeah, so I didn't notice any change in that. People just had to do basically their job to stay ahead. Nobody said, I'm going to change the way. We had 2/3 of our staff mostly work from home until it was safe to come back. And we changed the method in which the factory actually worked. They were working in very small teams of just 3 or 5 in a rotating shift. So, it's not so much about people deciding how they work best. It's more about how do we get this product out to the client? How do we deal with the disruptions in the supply chain or inventory or ordering? All these things change. So it's not about, I'm focusing on how do I change my job. It's more how has the job changed and how do I provide the best service to the client? So that's really what I would say.
Thank you for answering the question. For me, I would say my takeaway points from this webinar would be, during this pandemic, working with flexibility, connection, and learning. And I thank all of you, all the students who joined and the faculty who joined today's webinar, especially our guests, David, and our panelists, Thomas and Cliff Rose. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wish you all happy holidays and a great Saturday. And thank you for joining us. Bye.
Will there be room to stay in this heart the size of Wales? The size of Wales. Oh.